Research suggests that many people feel they have to suppress or hide their emotions at work in order to be seen as professional. As a result, emotions are often something we're encouraged to manage, control, or ignore rather than understand. So, what does happiness in the workplace actually look like? Is it different from employee engagement? And how does performance really improve when employees are encouraged to work with their emotions rather than pretend they're not there?
The largest ever study on happy employees ever is done by the NHS in the UK by Sheffield University. Professor Jeremy Dawson showed that if you go into two hospitals exactly the same, the one with the unhappier employees has a higher death rate. There are some companies that believe by chopping out like the bottom, like what they say are lower performers or percentage of employees, it will incentivize like the rest of the employees to work harder. If we make human beings robots, we're going to be replaced by the robots. We have to bring out what makes human beings brilliantly amazing, which is partly our emotions.
To explore these questions, I'm joined by Matt Phelan, public speaker, father, and co-founder of the Happiness Index. Established in 2014, their mission is to help organizations take engagement and well-being seriously. Using data gathered from more than 2 million employees across over 100 countries, they measure employee experience from onboarding through to the day people leave and help leaders to view emotions as a source of performance rather than a weakness. Matt, great to see you. Thanks for joining the show.
Thanks for having us along, Matt. Really looking forward to this.
Excellent. So yeah, look, before we get into the work that you're doing now, I'd love to take a step back a bit and thinking about the beginning. What did you see in organizations that made you realize that culture and well-being weren't being taken seriously enough?
I think for me, it was working in organizations myself that I didn't feel it or think that they looked after or even cared about it. And I didn't start working on it to maybe 10, 12 years after that. But I think people listening, and perhaps you, Matt, you can remember when it doesn't feel good. I think people...
Several times.
Yeah. And I think sometimes you can take for granted when it is good. But I think most people that are listening will have a memory of when it doesn't feel good. And I think sometimes, we'll talk about this later, the power of negative emotions, because sometimes they make you recognize something, look into it and think, that's not great. And I remember that feeling of getting a dream job, getting there and thinking, this is not for me. I can't do this culture.
Yeah, I think the power of negative emotions. I mean, ultimately, they're there to tell us what we should be paying attention to, right? Okay, so before you started doing this work, what did you personally misunderstand about emotions as a whole?
Oh, that's a good one. I mean, growing up as a boy in the 90s, we weren't really allowed. Like, I'm a football coach now. If you fell over, you don't show someone, you don't cry in front of someone. We were just taught, boys in the 90s in the UK, that's not for boys. It's that we've now got the language to call it toxic masculinity, which I think is a few steps forwards. But I didn't even think they were a thing. And I think about it a lot now.
Emotions in general, you didn't think they were a thing?
I just didn't think about them.
Right.
If I felt sad or unhappy or whatever, just buried it. And that's what I feel like most of my generation grew up doing. And then I think the way that we did it as we turned into teenagers to get rid of those emotions was alcohol. And then it was maybe a few years later I got into work and you start to see it and understand it. But I don't think we talked about it much in the 90s.
So yeah, not having the language to describe accurately how you're feeling inside, or actively being encouraged to, suppress it alongside, let's say, unhelpful coping strategies. Thinking back to my earlier comment about, let's say, experiences that have kind of led you to this point, you mentioned about several times when it didn't feel right. Is there anything in particular that stands out as like this was the moment? You mentioned about having a dream job. Was there anything specific that kind of happened where you kind of knew that, look, this was it type thing?
I saw where it could work really well. And I think I didn't realize that was unique until I saw somewhere it didn't work well. So I was really lucky. I got to work at a company that was acquired by the Guardian News Group, which is owned by the Scott Trust. And there, the kind of guiding principles, forget whether you're left or right for a second if you're listening. Just try and park that for a second and just think about it as an organization.
Sure.
But one of the principles in the Guardian when we got acquired, I remember in one of the first meetings, a HR person saying is, it doesn't matter who you are in this organization. If you think there is something that we should be writing about or talking about, if you're a cleaner or you're a CEO or whatever, you're welcome to come to the editorial meeting. Now, I don't know how many people actually ever did, but you knew it was fed into you in the early days. You knew that you could have a voice and your voice was important no matter what your seniority was. When I left there, I went into like a media agency, which had like the glamour of working for all the big clients, advertising, all the thing that I thought I wanted to do, the cool brand, all this kind of stuff. But it was the complete opposite. So I went from somewhere where voice was encouraged to where it was just like, no, huge hierarchy, different differentiations. I just straight away, I felt like no, this is not me. So it was going from something where it was there, and I think sometimes you can take it for granted. And this is why I don't see any of my experiences as negative. They're just huge learning things. I'm really appreciative that I went and I saw that culture, and it made me recognize what was important to me, which helped shape my future businesses.
Yeah, it's interesting how we learn what's important to us once it's missing.
That's one of the, that's why I think we'll talk about age and happiness later.
Sure.
But that's, we've all met that 65, 75-year-old person. It's just pure wisdom. And you wish you'd have that wisdom, but the only way you can get it is to live a life, isn't it? And I think certain people get that when they've lived a life, and that's why they're so calm and they're like Yoda-like.
Yeah. So thinking about some of your experiences and I guess how that shaped the work that you're doing, to date, the work that you're doing now. Let's talk about what you're trying to change. Specifically, when we think about the target audience, why should somebody, let's say a senior leader listening on their commute right now, care about benchmarking culture?
Okay, so I think there's two words that people are not always comfortable talking about, which is incompetence and ignorance. So if you don't know about something that's really useful as a leader, it's a form of ignorance. Okay, you just might not know that is the thing that you should be doing. You might not have been trained on it. You're not aware of it. So if you take things like well-being and happiness and mental health and these kinds of things, there is a level of ignorance where someone hasn't been trained on it, which comes into your work, Matt, all the stuff that you do. That is so important to create a level of awareness.
Sure.
Then at what point does it become incompetence? When people are aware of this, the impact of it on performance and business results, does it become incompetence? I don't have the answer for that, by the way, Matt. I just think there are two lenses to look at, which is the first thing is there is a whole world out there that is unaware of the importance of some of these subjects, despite how much it's been discussed. And once it is aware, at what point are we building these into the competence frameworks of what leaders should have? When we're interviewing CEOs for FTSE 100 companies or CEOs of huge law firms and all these places, are we putting these subjects into the competence bracket? Because if you look at the academic research, how people feel at work impacts the financial performance of an organization. Therefore, they need to be built into what we're interviewing and what we're hiring for in these roles. So at its highest level, when you talk about incompetence and ignorance, people get defensive, but I think they're useful words.
Interesting. I mean, I imagine it's obviously not the work of the moment to come up with an answer for this one, but I imagine, being aware of the data and the impact, if somebody's got, good knowledge of both and chooses to not make adjustments, that would fall into the incompetence piece.
Yeah. But I think it's not just about individuals, it's about teams. We have a saying that I absolutely love, which is data is the plural of anecdote.
Yes.
And that for me is something for teams to keep in mind, which is, let's just take a 500-person organization. One or two people might come and tell you their story, and you may be motivated to change something based on those two stories. But the power of data is when you get all of those stories, put them together, and you go, there's a trend here. We've got to do something about this. And that's where it stops being, oh, I connect with that story because that is something that happened to me as a child or when I was in my earlier career, to when you see it as a trend and you go, well, this is serious. We've got to do something about this.
So it's not just the data or the impact. It's the scale as well.
Yeah. And you can get,
Which creates the trend.
Absolutely. But there could be, but it's also important to point out, there is an example where it may just be one story and it's really serious and you have to get on it. And 99% of people are not experiencing that because you might have loads of other issues. So you shouldn't ignore stories.
Yeah, this isn't to say that just because it's an anecdote, it isn't also serious or doesn't need attention. Yeah,
Exactly. But it's where you start to look at these trends and prioritize. You think some of our clients got hundreds of thousands of employees. So we're talking about the CEO and how they prioritize where their efforts are, because there's still a responsibility on local managers who might be 10 rungs down the organization. They've still got to deal with stuff. They've still got to deal with those stories. They should be still listening to their employees.
And so thinking about trends, data, and what people pay attention to, what goes wrong when organizations only pay attention to the kind of rational, visible data and ignore what people are actually feeling?
Okay, so this happens all the time. If you look at about 90% of the well-known surveys that are out there, they're built by psychologists and they're rational questions that make the assumptions in many cases that we are rational beings. Now, the challenge with that, especially as we enter the AI era, is AI is starting to take over lots of the rational elements of work. And the bit that makes us different, the bit that makes you go back to that bar or makes you use that law firm over the other law firm, or the reason you resign from that job, is not always rational. And the way that I'd like listeners to think about this, Matt, is think about any relationship you've ever been in, okay? It can be any type of relationship. It could be sibling, it could be parental, it could be romantic, it could be a work relationship, okay? And at some point, you chose to leave that relationship. And the other people around you tell you that you're crazy. Like, what are you doing? Because they'll look at it rationally, won't they? Let's take a job. Oh, they've got great salary, great location, that brand name. And rationally, they think you've gone crazy, but you're living it every single day and you know it's not making you happy.
Sure.
Think about it in any romantic relationship. When someone leaves someone and someone's like, what are you doing? That person's perfect. They've got a great job. They're beautiful. They're all these things. But you know, you live that relationship every single day and you're not happy.
Yeah.
So it's just avoiding, and I understand why it's been pushed to the side, and we should talk about that as well, I think. But it's just not pushing it into the corner and saying it doesn't matter, because if we make human beings robots, we're going to be replaced by the robots. We have to bring out what makes human beings brilliantly amazing, which is partly our emotions.
Sure, because robots do what they do really, really well, and we do what we do really, really well. So it's good to focus on our strengths. And I guess the point there is that the rational and the visible data is great, but it doesn't necessarily give us the story as to what drives all aspects of human behavior.
Yeah. Take an example from retail. I remember maybe 15 years ago going to a pub in Ireland, and they were selling Guinness, and they'd worked out, they had these little machines where you didn't have to go to the bar and you just put your credit card in and it just makes you the Guinness there. And I remember myself and the guys on that trip, we were like, this is the future. You're never going to need people to work behind the bar. Did that technology take off? Absolutely not, because there is a social element, isn't there, when you go to the bar? And I say this as a non-drinker who still loves going to the pub,
Sure.
and I love Guinness Zero. There is something about that human beings crave, value, that is emotional, that when you go there, I can't remember, Guinness are famous for like making it sit. They pour half of it, don't they? They make it sit for, is it 60 seconds, 120 seconds?
You're educating me now. I don't drink Guinness, but
and effectively, if you look into the psychology of it, there isn't actually a technical reason why it sits there.
Got you.
But what they do is, and they've learned this over years and years, is they pour it. They leave half of it there, and it's all about the anticipation,
Right.
the waiting, the psychology, and then they top it up, and then it's handed to you. And guess what? Whether technically it tastes the same or different doesn't really matter, because you think it tastes better.
The placebo effect it's real.
Yeah.
Right. And it's interesting. I've been to Vegas once, but fairly recently, and in one of the bars there, they had like the robotic arm doing the cocktails, and it, by all accounts, it did it really, really well. But same example, they haven't taken over the bar space, the pouring drink space, because there is something fundamental to the human experience that cannot be expressed through interactions with a robot.
Yeah. That bartender who remembers your name,
Yes.
and they shake in the ice and they smile. It's just, it's human, isn't it? It's what makes us human beings.
So look, I think a lot of that thinking comes through in your book, The Happiness Index, which we actually have a copy of just here.
Just casually there, Matt.
Oh yeah, here's one we made earlier. So The Happiness Index: Why today's employee emotions equal tomorrow's business success. and it's obviously written by yourself, released in 2024.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. So I've really enjoyed listening to the majority of that book over the last couple of weeks, and for those of you that aren't aware, it describes the 8 top drivers of employee engagement and happiness, and there is a difference, which we'll speak about later on as well. But top 8 drivers of employee engagement and happiness: psychological safety, clarity, freedom, enablement to succeed, positive relationships, and there were a few more. I was doing so well.
You did really well, Matt.
Yeah,
You did more than I can remember without looking at the
right.
diagrams.
But based on data gathered from 2 million employees, over 100 countries, 223,000 plus happiness and engagement external research studies, expert interviews, and well, I guess just off such a rich data sample, and I have to say, just on an anecdote, listening to the book, I said to you just before we started recording, it's actually quite short as an audio book, but there is so much value in there, so much value that is just immediately applicable in my opinion. So definitely everybody check that out. But just in the terms of the journey, gathering all of that data, which clearly wasn't the work of a moment, what surprised you the most in terms of that journey of taking the book from concept through to releasing?
I think this is in the spoiler alert. This is towards the end. The thing that for me, when I looked at all the data and went through it, the thing that you start getting these big questions. The one that came to me is around meaning. So in my head, I feel like I can answer what is the meaning of life from having looked at all our data. And I'm not saying this is correct, by the way. This is my interpretation of it. So having gone through it all, and by the time I'd written it and got to the end and looked at all the data, for me, the thing that I learned is the meaning of life is finding meaning in life. And we are at work, most of us, more than we're anywhere else, more than we probably sleep, more than we spend time with our family. So if we are going to find the meaning of life, finding meaning in our work is a huge part of that. So for me, and this is personal because what someone gets meaning out of is totally different. You get meaning, I'm guessing, Matt, from the work that you do around mental health and well-being, and that goes well beyond the whole business side of things.
Massively.
I'd love you to talk more on that.
Go on.
But everyone's got different things, haven't they? The example and I hate saying this as a Tottenham fan, he did play for Arsenal, but there was a famous Arsenal player called Adebayor who got really slated.
Togo.
Yeah.
Okay, it is in the book, but yes, please tell us.
He gets really slated in his career for basically being a money grabber.
Yes.
But when you actually look into it, his view was, I need to get the highest contract that was on offer to me because I support things like my local church at home. So on the surface, you could look at that person and say, oh, they're just a money grabber. They're not about meaning because I do this and I do that. But actually, when you scratch a bit surface, even someone that's motivated by money, they may be a single parent. All of these things, sometimes you have to scratch a bit deeper on meaning. And I'm going to reverse it on you, Matt.
Go on.
I've made an assumption around your meaning. Can you just talk to me about what your meaning is with this business? Because I, as someone who's listened to a few of the podcasts now, I'd like to know.
I guess it comes down to purpose-driven work with people-focused outcomes, specifically by the meaning of using my experience for the benefit of others. That's really what I find meaning in. So I've had my kind of personal experience, it's well documented in terms of coming from that kind of corporate workspace over 10 years ago now, having an acute stress event and really finding out the hard way what it meant to be in an organization where employers, whether it was through ignorance or a lack of awareness, weren't in a position to support their employees before, during, or following a crisis. And so, whether it's distilling the guidance and opinions of senior leaders on various aspects of mental health in the workplace, or, talking about the different awareness days, or shining a light on different aspects of mental health in society, it's really about using my experience for the benefit of others. That's where I take meaning from.
And if okay, Matt, I'd like to scratch one level deeper than that, if that's okay.
You switched the interview around.
Sorry, we will get back to this. But why do you care? That's the question I've got for you, because you've got your personal story, right?
Sure.
And you are correcting some of that. But why do you care? You don't have to, do you? Like, why why do you even care about it? Because you could go and make more money doing something else, I'm guessing. But why do you, like, just to take us a little bit deeper, why is that important? Because you've, I'd love
Okay.
to know.
Okay. So surface level, you mentioned earlier that when I said about what did you misunderstand about the role that emotions play at work, or was there like a specific moment that you realized, and you took us into the boardroom at the Guardian, and essentially what you were saying was that you realized and you understood what it looked like when it was good,
Yeah.
and then you knew what bad looked like. And I guess it's a similar story for me, in so much as I know what bad looks like, and if even through one person viewing my videos, any of these podcasts, engaging with the channel, coming to one of my talks, or perhaps I happen to talk to them over the phone as a Samaritan, if even one of those people can have a better experience and avoid even some of what I went through at that time, that is a job well done. For me, not everything of value has a pound sign next to it. I guess being a lot younger back then, I kind of was chasing the money, chasing the pound note. I was in recruitment businesses and sales businesses, and I thought, yeah, the money was what was important. But no, it soon occurred to me that there was a lot more to life than that, and that actually it didn't really matter how much money I earned if you weren't being supported, if fundamental human needs, emotions, and behavioral drivers that we're speaking about now weren't being understood, then I was never going to be happy, because you can't support people unless you understand their motivations, which is exactly what we're talking about. So I've long-winded,
Yeah.
but I don't know if that answers your question.
The reason I want to go deeper, and it does, is because then take it away from you. That's where, like, the meaning and purpose is so powerful, because you've identified it clearly, and some people can't. They don't actually know what it is, but you know what it is. Now you've explained it. If someone took that away from you, you'd probably find it really hard to motivate yourself and so on. So I wanted to use your story, thank you, Matt, by the way, to explain why finding meaning is so important in finding the meaning of life, because it's richer. Rather than me saying, I think we're up to 5 million employees now. Again, once you turn the data into anecdotes, it has to go back to story.
Yes.
So I hope by you explaining that, the listeners will understand it more.
Yeah, no, it's useful, and interested to have that question put to me, and I hope people took something from that.
I promise to go back to being a good interviewee now.
Thank you. So, just thinking back to the book, then we kind of go through these 8 drivers, and what I really like about it is that it's this, and we're going to dive more into this, turning the brain data into actionable items, things that people can do in the workplace, practicalities in the workplace. But the way that it does that, and correct me if I get this wrong, but essentially you've got the kind of 4 different systems of the brain in terms of how. So you've got the data source,
Yep.
and then you've got the 4 systems of the brain. So that's the brainstem, the amygdala, instinct. You've got the emotions. That's the limbic system.
Yep.
You've then got prefrontal cortex. Neocortex, which is reflection, and prefrontal cortex, which is the rationale.
Yeah.
So you've got those 4 brains. You've got one piece of data.
Yeah.
4 brain systems. That's 4 different ways that you can process that. They link to those 8 drivers, but then behind those 8 drivers, you've then got kind of 4 substrata of kind of really granular level human needs. And I love that about the book. Like I say, in 4 hours, it's really just fascinating for me.
Yeah.
But I guess the question off the back of all of that is, when it comes to those individual drivers, which of those drivers do leaders tend to misunderstand most when they're thinking about performance or ROI?
That is such a good question. I've never been asked that before, actually. I think it does vary, but I am going to try and answer your question. I think the one that gets missed, and I'll also add to your question, underestimated. You mentioned it in the amygdala, and the instinctive part of the brain is the safety element. I think when you think someone's been hired as a CEO, they're trying to make an impact. Think about football managers or anyone. They're thinking, like, oh, I need to do this. I've been hired in here. And I think sometimes people forget the first thing you've got to do in any relationship is make someone feel safe. And the bigger the organization that is, the harder that is. But when people are into something new, they're getting excited, they're planning, they're doing this, they're doing that, but before their message will be received, there's an element there of safety and trust that needs to be built, and empathy for the situation that people are in. Like, I was learning more about the power of empathy the other day, and what it triggers and what hormones that triggers in your brain. That, like, the minute someone is empathetic with the challenge and the problem that you have, it already makes you start to trust that person more. So to answer your question, I would say in that sort of instinctive part of the brain where people forget that safety is the starting point. Because as we share in the book, relationships is the number one driver of happiness in every country that we ever work to. But you can't start establishing a relationship until you trust each other. So I would say safety. I could have just said that in 1 second, but I felt passionate about explaining it.
No, and that came through, and because again, just thinking about the granularity of that, and so safety, and then that breaks down into you're thinking about not only the physical environment, you're thinking about also trust, and there was another one to it as well.
There's psychological safety in there.
Yeah.
There is so many parts of it, and I probably go a bit deep in the book, but just think of it all as one. Just think of that in first impression, and just think, when you're leading or you're communicating, are you making people feel safe? And that may be challenging because, let's say, for example, at the moment, there's a lot of restructures going on.
A lot.
And we're seeing it in the data. Let's say that is a process that needs to be happen. But there is still a way that you can make people feel certain elements of safety. So say, for example, you were going through a restructure. Do the people believe that you, as that leader, are you going to do it with integrity? Are you going to follow the real legal process? Because there's a whole element in how people feel about how they're treated, about whether something's fair.
Yeah, and that also just makes me think about, again, just another layer of context to all of these drivers. They're going to mean different things depending on what's going on in the organization. Psychological safety is going to be very different in an organization that's going through a restructure versus one that's about to IPO.
Totally.
Etc. Yeah. So you mentioned the previous example was anchored around like a CEO joining a company, wanting to make an impression and not really being able to communicate their message until they can make people feel safe. What are the trends? This is from your experience writing the book, and more generally speaking, what are the trends have surfaced or come to the surface regardless of sector or seniority?
So we're just launching our new report on it. One of the things, it's actually become political to talk about whether you should work from an office or not. Even this week, Nigel Farage is talking about it. And
what did he say?
He said, I don't want to paraphrase that, but he was effectively saying working from home is not a good idea. I can't remember the exact words, but there was links to whether it's productive and all this kind of stuff.
Okay.
Now, I think what happens when it gets politicized is people forget why a politician might say something. And sometimes politicians are saying things not because it's factually correct or based on any data. It's to win votes. It's as simple as that. That is the game they are in. So when you hear anything, and again, I don't want to pick on anyone. Like, it could be left, right. It could be anyone in that putting a point out there. But that's where leaders need to take a step back and actually look at what the trends are. What's really interesting is if you look into our data, some people prefer to work from home. Some people prefer to work from an office. Some people work from hybrid. But what everyone wants, and this is where the data leads you.
Freedom.
Yeah, freedom. And they want their ability to be able to choose. A classic example that always comes up says, what if someone's a security guard, right? And they're supposed to secure this building that we're sitting in now. It's very unlikely that they can do their job 100% of the time by working from home because they need to be at a physical point.
Yes.
Now, that person doing that role isn't necessarily asking for the ability to work from home, but the flexibility to be able to, for example, their child has a dentist appointment and they want the flexibility to be able to switch it with another security guard without having to go for 400 layers of approval.
Yes.
But by which point they've gone through it, they've missed their child's dentist appointment. So flexibility and freedom is what everyone's looking for. So it's how do you design that in to, because if you've got thousands of people, you do need structure. Otherwise it's going to be absolute chaos. But how do you design in flexibility and freedom into a structure that allows some kind of level of consistency, but doesn't make employees feel like robots? And that's not easy, Matt.
No.
I'm not saying that companies can do that overnight, but that's the challenge.
Yeah. And I think if we're going to make progress, we have to kind of ask the hard questions, take on the challenges that, really make us think through things. Just on the point of flexibility and job design and autonomy, those were some of the things that the CIPD's Health and Wellbeing at Work report from last year identified as some of the kind of key drivers in terms of employee engagement, yet the majority of wellbeing policies didn't directly address them.
Yeah.
So just thinking about employee engagement, what do leaders misunderstand about the difference between happiness and engagement? Again, especially when they're looking at performance or ROI.
So the way that I remember it is happiness is what your heart needs and engagement is what your brain needs. Mm-hmm. Some people are not going to like that because that's too fluffy. That's just how I remember it. Engagement is here and happiness is here. If you don't like that version of it, which I happen to like, go on, Matt.
Well, no, I was just thinking back to what I understand about the book. It kind of maps to the difference. You could map it if you don't like that because it's too fluffy. You could map it directly to the different ways that the brain processes information. So you may or may not have been about to say this, but so for instance, the heart would be more instinctual and reflection, for example.
That's exactly where I'm going with it. But you've understood the book beyond most people that I speak to, which credit to you, Matt. But so if we want to take it down to another level, it's just happiness is what you feel and engagement is what you think, and acknowledging that they can be different. And again, use relationships as an example. You can feel that you're in a negative relationship, but you can think the relationship's okay. And that is really difficult for people with spreadsheets to get their head around, that how you think and how you feel can be different, which is that, go back to your point, that's a misunderstanding. So when you look at the data and you interview 5 million people, you can be engaged at work but unhappy. You can also be unhappy at work and engaged. So that, for people who like everything to fit into black and white and into spreadsheet cells, is confusing and goes back to why so many surveys are rational, because rational stuff you can put in a box. Emotions, they don't like to be put in boxes, and that's the challenge. And that's why I think partly engagement has dominated emotional surveys, because it's easier to monitor, it's easier to look, and I blame the saying, if you can measure it, you can manage it, for this.
Yeah, it's not strictly speaking true.
Yeah.
Just not in the conventional sense.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Just because you can measure something doesn't mean you can manage it.
No.
But we as human beings, we like to believe that we can control things. But there is so much in life that isn't controllable, and our emotions, even though we can impact them, is part of that.
This may form the basis for the answer to my next question, which is around, where organizations are most likely to get a false sense of security when it comes to well-being. So, for example, high engagement scores and poor well-being.
That's the big one we saw in the pandemic. I've sort of forgotten about the pandemic. I think we've all had this amnesia about it.
Sure.
We saw that throughout the pandemic. I was about to say high levels, average levels of engagement and below levels of happiness. So if you were just looking at an engagement metric, people were looking at their data. We published this data at the time, and everyone was engaged, but they were deeply unhappy. What that led to was if you look at the stats, what became known as the Great Resignation.
Sure.
I'm not trying to show off and say we were smart, but we could see that was coming in our data, and it did play through. But it wasn't because we're smart. It's just because we could see it, because emotions are a predictor of the future. And this is what sports people know. This is why lots of sports teams were the first people to adopt the happiness index, because they knew that how you feel impacts whether you can win a race, win a football match, win a golf match. They have understood. And actually, if we let's take a look at cricket just for a second, one of the first sports that came to the happiness index. They were one of the first sports to actually look into mental health, because it was there. There was players like Marcus Trescothick talking about mental health and not being able to play. There was Jonathan Trott. Off air, Matt and I were talking about eating disorders. Eating disorders for men is much less understood. For me, Freddie Flintoff, the English cricketer, educated me on stuff that I did not know about eating disorders. So I've gone way off track from your question there, Matt.
Well, firstly, on the on the Freddie Flintoff eating sort of thing, yeah, we were
Yeah.
talking about that off camera, and that's interesting because as we're filming this in early February, Eating Disorder Awareness Week, as I mentioned, it's at the end of February and beginning of March every year. But 2 years ago, the theme was because they switched themes each year. This year it's about community, but the theme 2 years ago was about men and eating disorders.
Yeah.
I think the catchphrase or the strapline was "Stranger things can happen,"
Yeah.
type thing. So yeah, really interesting. And to add to that, so you mentioned about sports teams being one of the first kind of organizations, types of businesses to come to the happiness index. But it sounds like there's still work to do in terms of getting organizations to understand well-being, even though that they know it matters.
Yeah.
Why do you think that is?
I just think it's structural, and I think it's that it's not connected internally. It's not, you don't see it in most P&Ls. Most of our customers, we try and rebuild their P&L. We call it P&L 2.0, so they can see how their culture is impacting their bottom line. But most companies are not doing that. So, and it's not easy to do, but it's not impossible to do. And we do that with our customers. And once you start doing that and you start seeing the costs in the P&L, that's when you can't ignore it. And going back to that bit before about incompetence and ignorance,
You can't. Well, yeah, exactly. You can't ignore it if it's literally linked to your deliverables.
Yeah.
Your P&L, and that's interesting. So I spoke with Chris Cummings, CEO of Wellbeing at Work World, and he's a specialist in mental health strategy. And what really surprised me from that conversation was that actually, as you've just alluded to, talking about mental health at board level, the mental health and well-being at board level, isn't a thing. It blew my mind because I'm like, well, but we've got all the data. These reports come out from Deloitte and all these organizations, CIPD, every single year. We know how much it costs the UK economy and businesses, presenteeism, absenteeism, etc. We know that. Why would it not be a conversation at board level? And yeah, to your point, that's obviously why the work that you do is so crucial, because you're helping organizations to actually integrate this link between culture and their profit and loss sheet, which is essentially speaking the language of people at board level.
Yeah. And it's so easy to do. I only sit on 3 or 4 boards total of companies, the happiness index and other companies I advise. But when I'm in the chair role, I go around the room and I ask people to talk about their work happiness and their personal happiness. Now, to some people, like someone who's listening might be running a FTSE 100, they think that is the worst use of time. People might be saying blah, 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 blah. But there is so much research now around the importance of the well-being, the leaders in the organisation impacting the performance as well, disproportionately to everyone else. So it is so important. If you've got people that are running an organisation that are burnt out, they're stressed, they're suffering, do you think if you think you're a CEO of a company, let's pick 10,000 company, the CEO...
Head count of 10,000, yes.
The CEO of that organisation, they're not going to be in the best place to make the best decisions if their mental and physical well-being is not in the right space. And the board should be a space where that can be discussed. But there's many reasons why people don't. And again, some of them are structural. Would they want something that's recorded to be written down? All of these fears that they will have. Again, let's pick on sports. Some people will say they don't want to tell their manager that they don't feel right because they don't want to be left out of the team.
Yeah.
And you may have that happening in corporates as well, but it can be done. Again, it's not easy, but it's not impossible.
So talking about work happiness and personal happiness, just picking up on that thread, is there a threshold in terms of the delta between the two where you can then predict to a high degree of accuracy that this company is going to have problems in the mid to near future?
I think what it is a predictor of the future. I think the best example that I can use, we're recording in February, is I think it's rained every day this year.
Pretty much, yeah.
So when we see the forecast, right, it doesn't mean it's not going to rain or you're going to get wet, but it means you can bring an umbrella. It means you can plan for it. What's the Scottish have a saying, isn't there's no such thing as bad weather, there's just bad preparation for clothes.
Exactly.
I've murdered that saying, but that is the same with emotions. If you can see all this stuff in there, you can start planning for it. You can start making decisions. You can start showing empathy to a global workforce that you might not be able to do when you're not in every location. So it is a predictor, but it doesn't mean you can solve everything.
Right. So it's a predictor, We know it's coming. It's like the forecast.
Yeah.
What stops leaders from acting on that information? Let's say it's clear there's a big gap between personal happiness, work happiness, and you're saying to them, well, actually, based on the information that we've got from all of these companies and all of these employees around the world, all of the research data, this looks like more likely than not, you're going to have some really bad weather in
Yeah.
3 to 6 months, maybe a bit longer time. What stops people from acting on that information?
Let's start with the minority.
Okay.
They don't care. There are some teams, some leadership teams and CEOs, they do not care. And no matter how much data they see, they don't care. You have to get into the reasons and why they don't care, because I want to be empathetic for these people, even though maybe we shouldn't, considering.
Diplomatic.
Let's say they haven't been trained. Let's say they're not aware. Let's go through that process again around incompetence and so on. So some of them don't care. I think the majority sit in a place where, and I think there's another extremist of that. You've got the people who don't care, and you've got the people who really care, intuitively get it. They're probably famous leaders that you can think of that come to your mind. People are listening. They've all worked. Everyone's worked for someone where the leader just gets it.
Sure.
If you haven't, maybe you've been unlucky. But most people have worked. I'm making an assumption people are old like me, actually, but some people might be in their first, second job. But by the time you've worked for like over 20 years, you've probably worked for one leader who just intuitively gets it, and you're like, brilliant. And you've probably worked for a leader who just doesn't get it. The majority in the middle, once they can connect up the data and see it all working, it all flows. But again, it's a system issue where we don't put things like emotions into P&Ls. But once you start doing that, putting that emotional data in, think of it from a customer perspective.
Sure.
If all your customers are really unhappy, you know that down the line that's going to hit the tills, or it's going to hit the money, it's going to hit the finances. Companies get all over that stuff, Matt. All over it, because they know it's an instant impact.
Net promoter scores and the rest of it. Yeah.
And I think this is where I hate using this analogy, but I think bad customer service, right? It's just like a slap in the face. It immediately hurts, and it's there. If you get bad customer service, it's right in your face, and you probably don't get back unless they address it quickly. Unfortunately, a bad culture is like a cancer that kills an organization over time. Some of the best people leave. Slowly, some of the not great people just stick around, and it slowly kills a company. But the CEO might be gone by then.
That's a hell of a contrast.
Yeah.
So you've spoken a lot about applying brain language to the workplace, and I'd like to think about how we kind of make all of this conversation and all of this information just really tangible for people listening. So a couple of questions here. First one, which of those human needs that you talk about is the most often neglected in day-to-day management, even by well-intentioned leaders?
Yeah. So the thing, again, how I remember it.
Sure.
Everything that we talk about in this book, and when we talk about brain stuff, some people like you, Matt, love it. It actually puts some people off, is the other thing I've learned. So the thing to remember is everything that Matt and I are about to go on and talk about has not been invented in the last 2,000 years.
Right.
And I think that's a good place to start, because to answer your question, these things, when I tell you them, they're really obvious, right? So let's take acknowledgement. Like feeling like the person that you employ has thanked you and appreciates what you do, and they acknowledge you in a way that works for you. That's not like a new revolution. That has been all the way back. If I know you like reading Marcus Aurelius' Meditations. For those that don't know, Marcus Aurelius was the Roman emperor in Gladiator with Russell Crowe, like the one that's demonized. He wrote a Stoic philosophy diary to himself. He didn't know it was Stoic philosophy at the time. It was his own diary that he wrote to himself. It is now out there. Anyone can buy it. They gave it to the troops in World War I to help their own well-being and understanding of how they feel. So all of this stuff is all human stuff, Matt. It's not complicated. You think about it like strong relationships, acknowledgement. Think about something in the engagement side. We talked about happiness a lot. Clarity. Actually knowing what your job is. Like, it is so underestimated. Let's do a test, right? Salesperson, what's their job? To sell. In what way? In how? Like, people need clarity. They don't want too much clarity because then it becomes micromanagement.
Sure.
But they need to know where the like, let's just take, again, I keep going back to sport, but are we playing rugby or are we playing football? We need to know to
just on an existential level, regardless of the needs, because it's going to vary from one business to another.
Yeah.
But they're there for a reason, and they're not new.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So just thinking again now about the practicalities of this. If somebody listening manages people but doesn't set strategy, what's one thing that they can do to that influences and genuinely improves well-being?
I think, again, going back to the clarity point on strategy, people can overcomplicate what strategy means. So if we, again, let's take something like purpose. People's brain need to know the direction and the rough plan to get there. So the way, if you're not giving your team strategy, clarity, or direction, think of it like this. You've said, let's go to the party, but you haven't said where it is. Then say, oh, let's go to the party in Leeds and we're going to get there by the train. That is giving the direction and the strategy in one. So just, and then imagine you've got these well-paid people in your team that you, as leader, you might be frustrated they're not quite doing what you need them to do, but you have to, and I've made this mistake loads of times, you have to like question yourself and say, am I giving them direction? Am I giving them a strategy? And also, more importantly, have you included them in the development of that strategy? Right, we want to go to Leeds. What do you think is the best way to get there? You might assume it's let's go get the train from London, but you may have missed the fact that one of your colleagues lives in Sheffield. It's easier for them to drive. Why would they come all the way down to London and go up? Like, I'm using a travel analogy, but these conversations, engaging your team in them, are so important.
Yeah, but and again, ultimately, there are things that what you've just mentioned there. It's what we'd call a no-brainer, but actually, it's not. Put it this way: common sense isn't common.
Yeah.
Some of these mistakes and worse mistakes than the one that you just mentioned, like let's say calling somebody from Sheffield to London to go back up to Leeds. Like, obviously it doesn't make any sense, obviously, but actually if it was that obvious, then there wouldn't necessarily be a need for some of these conversations.
Yeah.
Do you have, so you mentioned about almost doing like a check, turning the hour inwards, really.
Yeah.
Checking in with yourself as a leader and thinking, actually, am I giving them the strategy, the direction, the purpose, the clarity, etc.? Is there, in the work that you do with the happiness index, is there some kind of personal kind of checklist that you can do that you have for managers? Does that form part of the work that you do with organizations so people can, as leaders, check in with themselves across these needs and work out in any given kind of scenario, set piece, am I doing these things?
So there's a technical and a non-technical way. I'll give you the easy, free, technical way to do it. The easy, free, technical way to do it, all of our data in the happiness index, you can benchmark yourself against for free. So you can go to the happinessindex.com. There's a benchmarking tab, click on it, and you can send that out and you can see where your team is.
Got you.
So rather than talking about like this, all this stuff around the world, 5 million data points, 170 countries,
Yes.
actually see where you sit.
Good.
That's the technical way of doing it. You may not want to do that. Take the 8 things that Matt listed, sit down with your team and say to them, of these 8, what's the most important one to you? And Matt, this is where I'm going to be a bad interviewee again. I'm going to reverse it on you. Mm-hmm. So I'm just going to bring out, we'll use the Casually book here. And I just want
placement.
I just want you, let's find it here. You've got those 8 in front of you. I know you're pretty good actually at remembering them all. So like relationships, of those 8, what is the most important? Let's start with happiness. Of the 4 top happiness ones there, what's the most important to you?
So the 4 top happiness ones. So you've got the brain system it links to, and then you've got safety, relationships, freedom, and acknowledgement.
Exactly.
I would say freedom.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's very common amongst entrepreneurs like yourself. I say that as well. So we're similar on that. Most people say relationships. If you look at a data set,
right.
So as an average, we're not average when it comes to that. But if you were working in a team with me and you know that you need to set a framework up, but not micromanage us. But on the flip side, if someone says clarity, actually you do need to set a framework up and check in with them.
Yes.
So you can have the same person managed the same way. One person thinks you're a micromanager and one person thinks you don't care. So we'll do the same on the engagement side.
Yeah, I was just looking at
There's 4 there. Do you want to read them out, Matt?
Absolutely. So we've got meaning and purpose. So that's, meaning and purpose, clarity, enablement, and personal growth. And I'm going to go with personal growth. Yeah, I love to challenge. I love to expand my horizons. Anything that can kind of inform or shift my perspective. I think information recall and that type of thing definitely is a skill set that benefits me as a public speaker. Yeah. Might be the same for yourself. So yeah, personal growth I think would be the one here.
Yeah. So for dramatic effect, I wanted to pick a different one so it looked like that, but that's the same for me.
Really?
Yeah, actually is.
No way.
And I just don't like if I'm not learning all the time, it impacts me. But that's not the same for everyone.
Yes.
And so what I would, if we were working together, I would know that you need freedom, and I'd know that you'd need like a decent level of challenge to try new things and so on.
Sure.
But everyone else is going to be different. So that's the non-technical way. Write those down on a piece of paper in your next meeting and ask people to rank them. And if you won't get a group like me and you where it's the same. I've never seen it. If you get a group of more than 4 where everyone writes the same.
Yeah. And I think it just lends itself to just increasing openness and understanding amongst the team. Another one I've heard, this was from Rob Stevenson. I sat down with the last time, well, episode 7 or 8. Last couple of interviews. And anyway, he was talking about an exercise he kind of delivered to a team of people in a tax office for a consultancy. And the idea was that they sat down as a team exercise and shared their kind of 3 non-negotiables. So I know that one of yours is doing the school run every morning, for example. And the point here is that you sit down in a team of people very similar to what we've just described. And you say, right, what are your non-negotiables? Actually take the time to do it.
Yeah.
And, you'll be surprised as a manager, as a leader, what comes back, because you could be forgiven for thinking with the blinkers on, everybody wants the same thing, but they don't. And until you know that, you can't understand their rationale, you can't understand the drivers behind how they process data, and therefore how to lead them best.
Yeah. And I think where some of that comes from, and I feel like I'm about to criticize my mum, which I'm not, 'cause she's actually the best mum in the world. My mum always used to say, and she still does to this day, treat people how you'd like to be treated.
Interesting. I've got. You're about to flip it around.
About to flip it around.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we're on the same page then.
Which is that exercise that you did there, and the exercise that we're doing is treat people how they would like to be treated.
Yes, exactly.
So I feel bad for calling my mum out because it comes from a lovely, beautiful place. And I think if I sat my mum down and had this conversation, she probably means that.
Yes.
But once you flip it a little bit, that's what it does. Is it's like, oh, okay, that they don't like going to that type of party. Or I met a guy over Christmas. We went, our families went for a walk, and he said something that absolutely blew my mind, which I couldn't believe. He doesn't drink like myself, and he was talking about the Christmas party that his company had, where this massive party. They spent loads of money on it. Everyone was drinking, blah, blah, blah. And he said to me, I've never felt more alone in my life than I did at that Christmas party.
Surrounded by people, but alone. Because he didn't feel that connection because he was the only one not drinking.
Yeah, totally. And again, that just goes back to that saying, isn't it? Like, it's such a simple thing to do, isn't it? Actually, speak to your company and think about like what could work for them. So in our organisation, our Christmas party is 10 a.m. till 3 p.m. because we value the connection time that we have together. So we've questioned, what is the Christmas party for? Okay, it's for us to come together. Okay, if that's so valuable, let's put that in work time. Let's not put that 8 till 11 o'clock at night. And you speak to any HR person, they're stressed in January dealing with potential HR cases that have come out of a Christmas party. So just an example of just resetting and thinking about the ways that you do things. And just because you've done it that way for years doesn't mean you can't change it.
Absolutely. Like that. So thinking now about data at scale and some of the trends that start to emerge, the latest edition of your global workplace happiness report is due out on the 26th of March.
Yep.
By the way, I think you're having a launch party for this.
Yes, there's a launch event which has sold out.
Sold out.
Times 2. So we're going to put on 2 extra dates. I feel like like musicians are like, oh my God, we're sold out, man. But we actually have, and we're looking at putting a couple of extra dates on now. But it will be live streamed. It's hosted at Google, so I'm pretty sure it's going to be live streamed on YouTube.
Excellent. Okay, so I was going to say my invite, it hasn't arrived yet, so
we'll get you there, Matt.
Excellent. So this is what, the 12th year running it now?
Yeah, it's the 12th year of running the Happiness Index, but it's the first year of the global report.
First year, right? Okay.
Yeah, so we've been releasing data, which is what you're referring to for a long time, but actually putting it together in one global workplace happiness report. This is the first year, and we realised there's a need for it because there is the World Happiness Report, which is very famous, incredible report by the Wellbeing Research Institute at Oxford, Jan Emmanuel Denis, lots of amazing, brilliant people that's talking about all of life happiness. We're just focusing on that work bit.
When you chart emotional, instinctive, relational, and reflective data globally, as you've done in this report, what patterns stand out most, and what do they tell us about leadership priorities?
Okay, I think the biggest thing you're seeing in the data at the moment is around change. Most companies that I speak to their old business is slightly declining, and they are trying to move to a new business, and they've got a big group of people they're trying to take on that journey. And when you look at the data, there's all these emotions from scared to excited to loving the challenge to hating the challenge. What we see in that change curve, and you go back to all those things like instinctive, emotional, blah, 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 blah. You can't take people through the change unless you allow them to feel all of those emotions.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, because you've rewritten, amended the Kubler-Ross
Correct.
change curve.
Yeah.
To reflect this.
Yeah, just to slightly tweak it a little bit, and we've put those different states on there just to say to people, let's take scared as an example, right? Let's say you're seeing all the AI stuff now, and you think, well, that's the end of me. Am I
existential threat, instinctual?
Yeah. Then as soon as someone's scared, they're not receiving the information. But what companies tend to do is
because they're focused on survival.
Right. They're in fight, flight, freeze,
Exactly.
all the stuff that we know of.
Yes.
Now, the thing is, it goes back to the leader's role. How do you make someone feel safe so they can receive those messages? Because what you might be saying is, we're going to actually train people through this. If you want to come on the journey and you're prepared to change, we will support you. And there might be people that are not prepared to go on that journey. And that's a whole nother conversation for a CEO to have. But you may be saying, we will support you and bring you on this journey. But unless you make them feel safe in the first place, they're going to think it's a trap. Or they're going to think, oh, it's HR, they're trying to fire me. It's all these things that you hear behind the scenes from people.
I really wanted you to say it like in Star Wars.
I did want to say that, but one of the criticisms I had of my book is there's too many Star Wars quotes in there.
I love it. I love it. Okay, but that's all I heard when you said it.
Yeah. In my head, I saw it's the big fish guy, isn't it?
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah. General someone.
Yeah. Okay, so what are some of the things that organizations should stop ignoring based on this data? Some of the early trends that you're obviously privy to now.
Yeah.
What are some of the things organizations should stop ignoring based on the data?
So if you plot happiness on a graph for life satisfaction, ironically, it looks like a smile.
Right.
So 16 here, high, 65 here, my age, 43 at the bottom, the unhappiest point of your career, basically. And the reason they think that is because you've got all the challenges. You might have aging parents. I've just called my poor mum out.
Sandwich generation?
I haven't heard that phrase, but...
Yeah, it's essentially describing you've got kids, mortgage, somewhere in your career, but you've also got aging parents.
Exactly that.
Responsibilities are mounting up, but the benefits aren't necessarily.
Yeah. So if you plot that now, and I'll go on to what we found, that first bit, that 16 to 25, which was supposed to be one of the happiest points, is totally collapsing. So it looks like a half smile now. That has to be addressed because this is the future workforce. We all have a responsibility for it. I always think of what's the band called? But they'll come back to me. They have a lyric which is, "If we tolerate this, our children will be next." It's a Welsh band. Have you heard that lyric?
No. So immediately when you said it, I was thinking of Rage Against the Machine. I was thinking of Rage Against, but no.
It's a 90s indie band, and someone is listening, and they're going to put in the comments the band that I'm talking about.
What was it called? One more time.
If we tolerate this, our children will be next. Manic Street Preachers.
Manic Street Preachers.
Yeah. And there's a whole mental health issue with that situation with that band as well, which is another segue not to go down. But
sure.
that lyric for me sums up what's going on. And interestingly, if you look into the data, working from home for younger people is not working. Which, again, that's where I don't want it to be politicized, because then suddenly you get a politician going, the happiness index have proven that working from home is bad. What, to me, that's showing is early careers where you build strong relationships that are really important as your career moves forward. We need to find ways of facilitating those relationships. That doesn't mean the office is the way to do that, even though there's many good reasons for having an office. But it can't be that binary that it means people are unhappy, we need to put them back into the office. Because the challenge I always say with the office is, if you were going to organise a great event, you wouldn't do it in an office. It's not the greatest place to connect people. So I think what it does is it highlights there's a real issue and challenge there with younger people being disconnected. There's more to it than that, by the way. But that is one thing that we cannot ignore if we want business to thrive moving forward.
Yeah, there's a number of things going through my head right now as to why that might be the case. Yeah, probably we segue down a rabbit hole if I go into it.
Yeah.
But as you see it then, so we kind of shaped what might be an understandable reason for the kind of, as I coined it, the sandwich generation, to be at the bottom of that curve. Outside of working from home, what else do you think is collapsing the curve for this new generation coming through?
There is fear around AI. We touched on that.
Sure.
I think businesses have got to show how they're going to use it. They need to get on. They need to move on from talking about whether it's going to happen. It is here. It is making people more efficient, but employees need to know how that's going to fit into their role. Otherwise, people are just going to stay in fear. So people, I think the other thing that we're seeing is we call it like the middle manager squeeze. There's people in the middle that just feel really squeezed at the moment.
Yeah.
But again, the biggest trend that I see continually is the feeling of companies feeling stuck. And it's both ways around. It's employees feeling like they're not part of the future, and it's companies feeling like the employees are not moving fast enough to move there. I think the answer is in the middle, where you're taking people through all those elements of change, which include emotions, which if you ignore emotions, back to the beginning of the conversation, you can't take people through change.
Solid. So, despite the evidence to the contrary, there is still a lot of noise around well-being at work.
Yep.
What is the most common belief about the workplace, about workplace happiness, you'd really like leaders to let go of, especially when it comes to performance?
That happy employees are lazy. This isn't in the data, but this is what you hear.
Sorry, I've just realised happy employees are lazy. That's a belief?
There is a belief amongst CEOs behind the scenes that think that if people are, it is a phrase that will come from people, oh, you got to keep people on their toes.
Right. Yeah. Okay. I have heard that before.
Yeah. And there is this kind of like weird inbuilt thing. And you even see it in some of the redundancy data. There are some companies that believe by chopping out like the bottom, like what they say are lower performers or percentage of employees, it will incentivize like the rest of the employees to work harder. There's all these like weird things that have been around for years that companies have done that are these kind of like old beliefs that they're not going away amongst certain people. And that's why I think the data and the research is really important. And now the happiness index is a benchmark, right? So we're real-time data, but below all that is all the academic research that underpins it all. And more research needs to come out. And also people need to be aware of the research that's already there. The largest ever study on happy employees ever is done by the NHS in the UK by Sheffield University. Professor Jeremy Dawson showed that if you go into two hospitals exactly the same, the one with the unhappier employees has a higher death rate. So most people are listening thinking about law firms or accountancy firms, or we talked about sports teams. Think about the NHS. It's actually killing people. So it's the opposite to this whole happy employees are lazy. Happy employees are more competent, they're more productive, they're more creative, they create better financial outcomes. In the NHS, happy employees reduce the death rate of a given hospital. So I know it's quite an extreme thing to say, we've got to stop seeing happy employees as lazy, but I hear it enough times to know it's a thing.
Wow. Listen, Matt, on that bombshell, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show. Thank you for taking the time to sit down.
Matt Squared. Thank you, Matt.
Cheers. Matt Squared.
Cheers.
Love it. If there's one thing to take away from this conversation, it's that emotions aren't something to work around, they're something to work with. This has been Wellbeing Talk with myself, Matt Balfour, your guide to all things mental health in the workplace. Be sure to subscribe to the Let's Go Wellbeing YouTube channel, and we'll connect on the next episode.